can't see you that well. So if somebody notices that there's a hand up, then just interrupt me and let me know that so I can answer the question, because I might be so focused on this presentation that I don't notice. I'm going to try and watch, but I'll see what I can do.
That's
And
fine. I'll be on the watch out for you, Mike. That's fine.
perfect. Okay.
Thank
So
you. Yeah.
similar with chat, I mean, I might not spot that you've got a question in there too. So just cut me off, ask questions whenever. We'll just have a nice chat today about stakeholders.
Sure.
So here's our topic. Stakeholders are your critical success factor. Before I get started, you heard a little bit about me. Maybe, but something that I'll also offer is I'm calling you from Calgary. I've lived most of my life in Calgary. So I'm a prairie boy. I don't know too much about the ocean, that all the stereotypes apply to me. So I'm born and raised in Calgary. Most of my siblings still live in the area. So it's still early for me. There might even be people trying to get a hold of me at work. Who knows? But I'm going to ignore them. I'm all yours for today. I want this to be interactive. So the first thing I want to do is set up our interaction tool. So we're going to use a tool called Slido. If you've ever used things like Kahoot, it's similar. But please take your phone or your computer, open a browser, and you can either open this QR code or go to slido.com and type in 6102666, and this will be the tool that we use for some interaction in a couple of spots during the presentation. So I'll give you a second to get that done. And then I'm going to ask you a question. So the first question I'm asking you is, which city are you in now? Moncton. Excellent. Fredericton. Saskatoon. Oh, you're closer to me than you are. Excellent. Lots of people in Moncton. More people in Saskatoon. Wow, Surrey. Across Canada. We're a nationwide meeting tonight. St. John. Actually, something else I should have asked is how many people are on the call? I didn't even check that.
So we have about 20 people on the call.
Okay. So we've got 11 people so far that have answered. So we can have a few more. But Moncton is the primary, the big one, the big name there. If you're having some trouble getting this to work, let me know in the chat or speak up. And I'm not a Slido customer support representative or anything, but maybe we can help. Okay, let's move on. So basically, the question to start with is, what is the future of business analysis? What's the future of the profession? What's the future for you? What is the critical success factor? Well, I'm going to say stakeholders, right? Because that was the title of my talk. Stakeholders are your critical success factor. But to make it clear, let's take a step back. Let's look at the current role of a business analyst. I work predominantly in solution delivery in agile teams. And so a lot of the things that I'll talk about are going to be in that framework. You can take everything I say with a grain of salt, because now I work in an agile environment most of the time. But business analysis is there's most of the tools and frameworks and things that we focus on are the same. But let's take a look at a role of the business analyst. In a team that I'm typically used to, we have several different roles represented. There's a tech lead, a developer, a project manager, a QA, and a BA. That's kind of the typical setup. There might be a few people in each role, but those are the roles. And on that team, each role has a different focus. So the tech lead wants to do the right thing, and the dev wants to do the thing right, and the PM wants to do the thing right now, and the QA wants the thing to work right, and the BA wants the thing to fit right. And what are they trying to fit? They're trying to fit the need. A BA tries to fit the need. And to do that, it's got to fit right. Um, so what does that really mean? I mean, fit right. So the future of business analysis, what we really are, some people might say it's a communicator. We deal with communication. But with all the technology that we have, especially through the pandemic, all of this video conferencing and remote meetings and technology, there's chat GPT to gather information. How does that affect us? Like how do we fit into all of this? Well, basically, it comes down to the people. People are at the heart of the solutions that we deliver. And if to be successful, somebody has to be the bridge between the solution and the people, and that's a BA. That's the simple answer. With all the many technological advancements that are happening these days, there still needs to be that touch point with people, and we do that. And if you think about it, if you think about how a project is measured for success, we usually look at a few different things. We might look at user adoption, or we might say, talk about the user experience. We certainly want to satisfy needs, and all of those are user-based. It's all user-based conversations. It is how we measure project success. It's whether or not the thing fits right. That's what it means. The thing fits right. And what are we trying to fit? Well, we're trying to fit something to the need of a stakeholder. So there's no way for it to fit right if we haven't talked to stakeholders. So now stakeholders are your critical success factor. Has to fit right. So the first thing I'm going to give you a chance to do is learn from my mistakes. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of things that happened to me with stakeholders that didn't go all that great. Things so that you can understand maybe a little better how important this is. So in my first project, remember, I was just a young guy, I had a full head of hair, I'm pretty sure at that time. Anyway, in my first project, we were creating some software for a very small team. The small team was responsible to keep track of thousands of members of the organization. And they really were stretched pretty thin. They needed some help. And they had decided to look to create some software, basically customer relationship management software, but very specific, very custom. So we were going to build some custom software for them. And as I mentioned, this was my first project. I didn't know what I was doing, but somebody with more experience at the time said that we need to be able to talk to somebody to get some answers, to answer all of our questions. And I thought, oh, that makes good sense. So the manager who had talked to us about the software said that her team was really busy. That's the whole reason we're doing this software. So none of them are really available. But the good thing was that she would be available anytime we had a question. She would answer it. She would get us the answer to whatever question we had, and we would be on our way. And that seemed great. So we worked with her for several months, got the software ready. And then it was time to introduce it in a test environment to her team. Her team, she had basically made her team available for testing, and so this is the now was the time to introduce it to them. So we proudly showed them our little baby, our software, and they hated it. It didn't solve any of their problems that they had, and it didn't even follow their business process properly. It was really bad. And so basically we discovered that the manager really didn't know what her team was doing, and she wasn't a very good resource for us. And so we had to kind of start over again, not start all over, but we had to really dig and figure out what doesn't work, what should it have done. And I learned my lesson. My lesson in my first project was check with all of the stakeholders. One is not enough. Now, I know lots of you already learned that, but still, that's what I learned on my first project. Check with all the stakeholders. Okay, then what? Well, I had a second chance. Another small team, overworked. They needed something to help them out. They couldn't handle the workload. And so we were going to build them some custom software. In this case, it wasn't thousands of members that they were trying to manage. It was thousands of quotes that they were trying to manage. And they just weren't able to do it. The quotes were really detailed and complicated, and they needed something. So off we go again. But I learned my lesson. I talked to the manager of this team, was a friend of mine. So he called me up, wondered if we could do it. Um, he kind of explained what he needed. I sort of gave him an estimate. He said, "Excellent, that fits within my budget. We should be good." But I learned my lesson. I told him I need to talk to all your stakeholders, everybody that's going to be using this software. And he said, "Perfect." He admitted that they knew the process better than he did. They knew he said, "You need to check with them. You need to check with all of them." And I thought, great, perfect. I won't run into that problem again. So off I went. I started meeting with all of the people. I've met with the first person. They had a slightly different take on what this software would need to do than the manager, but the manager assured me up front that they know better than him. So, okay, cool. So then I met with a few other people in the department, and each one of them seemed to have a slightly different direction that this software should take. But I thought it's all doable. I can make this work. So I started working away on it. But clearly the scope had expanded a bit. And after working on this for a bit, I realized I'm getting very close to my original estimate and I'm not done yet. So I talked to the manager and he said, "Well, that estimate you gave me, that was my budget. I can't go past that." And I said, "Well, I'm just building what they said. It was quite a bit more than how you described it." So he asked for a little bit of clarification, and he wanted to know what I was doing. And I showed him all the great stuff I was building. And he said, "Oh man, I wish you would have checked with me. That's not what we need. That's not what I paid you for. That's not what I told you. That's not what I wanted." Oh no. So I learned my lesson. I checked with all the stakeholders. I did exactly what they said, and it wasn't right. So what did I learn in the second one? I learned that I need to review with all the stakeholders. I should have looped him in a little more and made sure that I understood that I was still on track. After all, he was the sponsor of this thing. It was his vision. Oh, so I learned that lesson. Ugh. So I got better. I'm getting better all the time. We learn from our mistakes, right? So then later in my career, I was working with a large company and they had a fairly broken process, but it was a huge process. It involves dozens of departments for the entire process. They all knew it was broken. They all knew it was cumbersome and painful and really wasn't working, but they also didn't know where to even begin to try and fix it. So what we decided to do was have a 3-day workshop, get representatives from every involved department. We planned this thing for months, made sure we had all the stakeholders. I made sure I had everybody there. I made sure we were going to be reviewing with all the stakeholders because everybody was going to be in the workshop. So we had a 3-day workshop. It worked really well. There were so many cool comments from the people. One person said they had no idea how hard it was for the teams giving them the information to produce that information. They just thought it'd be nice and easy and pretty helpful. And they decided they don't need it. If it's that much work, they don't have to have it. So it made it really easy in that direction. Other departments said, I had no idea this thing that I now do every day is so simple and it's so important. I had no idea. So it was really great for them to get together, understand how they interact, the pieces they work with, and it was very fruitful. We had a good set of action items at the end of the workshop. But I've got this listed as one of my mistakes. What went wrong? Well, at the very last day, we were talking. It was very good. Everybody was very happy. And one person said to me, oh, wow, if I knew we were going to cover this, I would have suggested that you talk to Eileen's team. She would be very interested in this. So I thought, no, I missed somebody. I tried so hard to find everybody, but I missed one person or one team at least. And I had to talk to them afterwards and ensure that they were definitely disappointed that they weren't involved. But they agreed with the most of what was said. They agreed with the action items. Turned out I got lucky. Everything turned out well, but I could have been bad. I could have found a whole new set of problems that we didn't address. And so, what did I learn from that? Identify all of the stakeholders. That's what I missed. So, all of these things are part of stakeholder analysis. So, we want to let's dig into stakeholder analysis. Um, so in that last example, that last mistake, I learned that you have to identify all of the stakeholders. But just having a list of stakeholders isn't enough. You have to understand their interest level and how much influence they have. You have to you have to gather their perspectives and understand what they care about, what's their needs and their wants. Um, and so you have to make sure that you've got enough information to manage the stakeholders properly. Um, and so but the first part of that, the very first point is looking at identifying stakeholders. So, and it's critical as I mentioned, to identify all those stakeholders. So how would you do that? Well, one way, the easiest way, probably the first way, is to just brainstorm. Think about everybody who might care about this. Think about internal and external stakeholders, people who are directly involved in the process or the solution or the problem, or maybe they're just affected by it. And it might not just be individuals, it might be groups or even other corporations that are involved. So brainstorming, that's something we can do right here. So let's try it. Here's a case study. You're going to use Slido again, so get that ready. Here's a case study of a company called FP Transportation. Now, they are a cross-border trucking company. They haul produce from California to Western Canada. And they bring me my avocados. Um, basically they haven't reviewed their process for years. They know that there's an opportunity for improvement. They don't know really where yet, but they know it's got to be there someplace. And so what I want you to do is use Slido and start to think about put in who are some potential stakeholders that would be interested in the processes of FP transport. customers, excellent. Yeah, me with my avocados, right? The drivers, they're certainly affected by everything that happens. There's buyers and sellers and the company itself, internal and external government unions, excellent. Um, the managers, supply chain, oh, the sellers, yeah. The drivers, oh, the mechanics, excellent, yeah. Produce managers, yeah, right, from the grocery stores. Um, the customers, excellent. It's a few people still typing at government agencies in the transport industry, maintenance department, excellent. The quality checkers, right, good point. Vendors, marketing, drivers, dispatchers, yeah, trucking companies, lots of dispatches. Health and safety, yes, government regulations, they have to follow those. The entire team that meets the customer's needs. Excellent answer. Regulators, receivers, store managers. Got a couple of people still. Oh, perfect. Standard organization. So we have lots of downstream people. There's the farmers, the suppliers, like the farmers who the farming companies. There's there's this the all of the people that supply parts to their trucks. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Oh man, I had a long conversation with the EPA a few days ago, trying to gather some information for my current client. They have the information, but they don't really sell it. Just too bad. They have it all anyway. That's a side thing. Oh, banks even. That's good. Okay, so lots of them, right? One more person's adding something here. Let's see. Avocado canning and packaging company. Excellent. Okay, so let's move on. So brainstorming is excellent as a perfect start. So now that you've got a few names, you've brainstormed some people, how do you make sure you've identified them all? Remember my last mistake? I thought I had identified them all, but I could have done more. So what could you do that's more? Well, you have a list. Why not ask them? Ask them. They probably know who's involved. You can ask really specific questions like, what roles do the other members of your department fill? And you might discover other stakeholders that have different interests than the ones you've already talked to. Or do you work closely with another department? Um, is there someone who I should be sure not to overlook, just like what happened in that workshop? Or just to simply say, who else should I talk to? Very simple. But your stakeholders are your best source as an initial digging for some more stakeholders. And if you tell them in advance that you're going to meet them and talk and ask them for stakeholders, they sometimes come up with a big list of people to talk to, which happened for that workshop. It was quite fruitful. Okay, what are some other ways we can identify stakeholders? Well, you could look at the corporate structure. So let's say this one is the department that you're working with. You could look down this corporate structure and into the teams and the departments that do the actual work down that hit the ground running, that are on the shop floor, for example. Or you could look across the organization to peer teams. There might be a team over there that's affected by what you're planning to do, and they could become a stakeholder. Um, another place to look for stakeholders are process maps. When you have a process map, you have all sorts of information. There's a start and an end. So the start, what happens before the start? Maybe there's people involved there that are involved in your process that you should ask about. Each swim lane is certainly a department that is involved in the process. And you can look for off-page references. Sometimes there's a spot in the process flow where where it's off page. It could involve a whole bunch of other departments or people that aren't actually shown on the process flow, but they are involved and they're identified in the other one. And then always, if there's something, a pause in the process in some way where you're waiting for another process, that other process must have stakeholders. So it's a way to start digging in process maps. Thinking about pausing, I'm not sure if any of you have used value stream maps. With that 3-day workshop I told you about was a value stream mapping exercise. So value stream mapping is really a process flow, but it gathers a bunch of other information. It gathers information about the suppliers, the people who actually provide the raw materials to the process. It captures the customers that are affected by the outcome of the process and all the other players involved. And it also captures waiting times where something is stalled for a while. Excuse me, I'm going to get water here. So it's a great tool to paint a process, and it also inherent in it, it is capturing the pain points, the items that aren't working that well, and it gives a great framework to start finding areas for improvements. Okay, so now we've identified everybody, we've asked around, we looked at process maps, we looked at the corporate structure. Now we think we've got everybody. What do we do with that information? So how do we, so now the next part of stakeholder management is to gather the information of the stakeholders. And what do you need? Well, that depends. And so that's the standard answer, right? All the time. That depends. So really, in some cases, you might just need a real simple stakeholder list. It's a nice, easy way to capture all the information, let's say in a spreadsheet, and you can start to gather whatever's needed for your project. That might just be the name, the department, their role, a few details. You could capture their needs, that sort of thing. Another tool is a stakeholder map, which is like a mind map, but it captures the relationships between all your stakeholders. You can start with your primary team in the middle and then branch out to all the other teams that they are involved with, and it's a way to keep track of who's who. So then so the one thing that you want to do is you want to keep track of who, who is involved, to what extent, what is their interest, how much influence do they have, how much influence should they have, that sort of thing. One thing you can use for this is a RACI matrix. You may have used these for understanding your role in a project team. They're often used in that respect, but you can use them to track stakeholders too. So RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, if you've never used one. Responsible means who does the work, who's on the shop floor. Remember our corporate structure, who's on the shop floor, who does the work. Accountable is the person who's ultimately responsible and has veto power. Like that second error, it was the manager's budget that I blew. He had the ultimate veto power. He shut down the project because we went over budget. So you have to he's accountable. So that's that stakeholder. Who should be a consultant? Who provides feedback or contributes to the understanding? They might not be accountable or responsible for the work, but they have information you need. And then there are people you need to, on the other side of the communication, who need to know what you're doing. That's again, that second error. The manager needed to know, and I didn't keep them informed. So a RACI matrix might look something like this. This is a very simple one, but I've got, in this case, I have roles along the top and areas of interest along the side. So subject matter expert 1 is responsible for all of area 1, area A, pardon me. They do that work. Area B, they don't do it, but they're a good place, a source of information. So they should be consulted when I'm starting to look into the details of area B. Subject matter expert 2 is responsible for B and C. The product owner is accountable. They they they're responsible to make sure that this particular process, whatever it is, works properly. And maybe the sponsor, it just needs to be kept informed. They started the business case and they've sent it off to a project team. They just need information. And then a source of information might be a federal regulator. They should be consulted, or at least their website should be consulted to be sure that we're following federal regulations, that sort of thing. Just a way to keep track of the type of interest and information you need from each person. So that's one way to do that. Another way is an impact interest grid. I really like this. I don't always write it out, but I often think about it when I'm thinking about a stakeholder, figuring out what quadrant they land in. It's very helpful. So we have interest, their interest in the success of the project along the x-axis, and their impact or power or influence in affecting the project on the y-axis. And so how does this work? Well, basically, you can slot people into their quadrant. So anybody that has keen interest in seeing that this project is successful, whoops, let me go back here. And they have a great deal of power in affecting the ultimate solution. Those are your champions. They want it to work and they have the ability to push it along. They are your champions. In this quadrant, they're not interested in the success. Maybe they don't care, or maybe they're actively trying to sabotage it. But they have the power to change it. They have the power to affect the ultimate solution. We call those blockers. So there you can see how they could be trouble if you're not keeping track of them. On the opposite side, we have supporters. They don't have a lot of power or impact in what the final solution is, but they are keenly interested in seeing that it's successful. Maybe they're one of the peripheral teams to the process. They don't do it, but they get maybe there's the customer, the ultimate customer, or something like that. They're your supporters. And then finally, there's detractors who have little interest in seeing it successful, and they have no power in guiding what is ultimately done, but they care. They're in there. So the reason why this matters is because you manage these people differently. So, for example, the champions, you want to manage them closely. As I said, they can really make or break this thing. They want it to work. They have the power to make it work. They have the power to get to the end goal. Let's manage those people very closely. Blockers, you don't want to spend a lot of time on them. The champions are the ones that are going to get you to the end goal. The blockers, though, they have the power to sabotage, to circumvent your success. So you want to keep them satisfied. And it could just be understanding what their concerns are and assuring them that we're still on track, not to cause that problem. Keep them satisfied. Supporters, just keep them informed. All they need is an idea of what's happening, and they'll be your best cheerleaders. Just keep them in the loop and keep them informed. Detractors, they can't affect the end product that much. They don't care whether it's successful. Just monitor them. They could become a really negative voice. So just watch them, make sure that they're not causing too many troubles. So that's the impact interest grid, excuse me. So if you're going to fill in one of these, it might look something like this, where the sponsor is a champion. They started this thing off. It's their money. They have veto power. They're in the top corner here. Project managers might be spread across many different projects. So whether this particular one is successful or not. Maybe they're not hyper excited. They don't want to have a failure on their hands, but they have the power to affect things. Subject matter experts are probably some of your best champions. Regulators, government regulators, they don't care whether you're successful or not, but they have some power on what the ultimate solution looks like. So make sure that you're not keeping them satisfied. Do the reporting, submit the permits, all those sorts of things. Customers, as I mentioned earlier, might be your supporters. They have interest. They have an interest in its success. Um, they don't ultimately say yay or nay to anything, but they can make suggestions. And then suppliers might not care either way. They don't really impact you one way or another interest. But if they don't like what they're seeing, they can start to cause some troubles. That's sort of an example. Doesn't always land like this. I mean, maybe your subject matter experts are, it affects their livelihood if this doesn't work properly. Like the first project I was talking about, with those subject matter experts that I didn't talk to, really, really were interested, and I didn't, and they need to be in there. So it's helpful to think about this when you're looking at what the stakeholders can do. All right, let's oh, I put some actual names in. Interesting. I forgot that slide was in there. Okay, so, oh, I know why that's in there. Let's go back for a second. So in here, you'll see it might be names of people, it might be departments, or it might be organizations. So it's just whatever the stakeholder is identified by, you put them in here. These aren't real names, by the way. Okay, so that's influence. So we understand their power, how they can affect the outcome. So stakeholder management, back, take a step up again. We need to understand their perspectives and their needs and their wants. So how do you keep track of that? Well, one method that is quite successful, particularly if the number of stakeholders is a lot. If you're talking about, let's say you're talking about Microsoft Office. Well, you can't identify every customer of Microsoft Office if you are Microsoft trying to deliver a better product. So but you can use personas. So personas, for example, are kind of describe your typical consumer or your typical stakeholder. Personas tend in the best practice is that you make them very specific, very personal, lots of details to suggest so that the people on the team really feel like it's a real person they're delivering this to. So the best practice for personas is be very specific. This is a nurse. Her name's Anne. She's 26 years old. We got a quote from Anne. Anne's just a fictitious person, but she likes to cook and work and socialize and walk and volunteer, goals and aspirations. It just gives it life. It gives your persona life, and it helps the project team understand what they're doing. And you would have different types of personas. You wouldn't have just one. So here's one with he's 87 and these are his goals and frustrations. Here's another person, Drew, he's an influencer, and there's some core needs that he has. So these are not real people, but they represent the kinds of things that the real people might need. So that's stakeholders. But the most important thing really, like these can be too generics. They can capture, they might not capture specific concerns of specific stakeholders. So ultimately, you want to make sure that you're capturing the stakeholder preferences. If you can do it as personas, great. But you want to understand what makes them tick, what really matters to them. If you don't address those things and understand those things, you'll take the solution in a wrong direction, and it won't fit right in the end. All right. It's time for another brainstorming exercise. So we're going to use Slido again. if you think back, if you think over the last, let's say the last 8 years, we've had a lot of changes in the world. Um, we've had we've had so many strange things happen. Um, I think they're strange anyway. Things that are just that nobody would have thought about a decade ago. So what I want you to think about now are some of the new stakeholder types that didn't exist a decade ago. What are some new stakeholder types that have appeared in the last decade? Social media influencer. Hey, yeah, that was Drew, or the guy with the last persona. Yep, influencers weren't there. I remember laughing at the story of um, where a food truck charged double to influencers because they kept trying to get food for free. Artificial intelligence and robots consuming data. That's a good point. Robots and those people who work on the robots, right? Digital stakeholders, right? Yeah. Yeah, especially when so much business is done virtually now. Environmental sustainability. Yes, right. There's cloud. Yeah, cloud services. Excellent. Um, self-service points. Ah, yes, right. Like there's I like to go grocery shopping early in the morning, but early in the morning there are no cashiers. So there's just the one person at the self-checkout spots. Data privacy advocates, right? Yeah, artificial intelligence. Okay, so I was thinking of some myself. There's remote employees are a new thing. On my last, I've been on this project that I'm on right now for quite a while. One of the tech leads that has used to be on this project lives in Colombia, and we work every day together. So remote employees are pretty common now, and geographically disparate. So that involves all sorts of cultural diversity. Some of these other ones you've talked about, even Indigenous advocates now have a pretty strong voice in some infrastructure projects. These are all new stakeholders that weren't really involved a few years ago. So there's some other, so they have different interests. They would represent a different persona, and they're all people that need to be part of the stakeholder group. Okay, so back to another area of stakeholder management. It comes with its own set of challenges. Um, One really common challenge, I think, every time I've talked to stakeholders, this is a common challenge. They have time constraints. They don't have time. It's not their main job. How can I possibly give you some time? I'm busy enough as it is. So how do you get around that? How do you get around a legitimate time constraint? I say legitimate because sometimes it's just whining and complaining, and you need to talk to the sponsor to get them to explain that this is important. This is part of your job. It's important. Please spend the time. But if they legitimately don't have time, then you can start to work with partners. Um, Make sure that you gather information as efficiently as possible. Find a proxy for decisions. If one decision maker doesn't have to make some of the smaller decisions, find a proxy for the other decisions. Be very organized. The project I'm on right now, I only have a few touch points during the week. Been on projects where I'm sitting with stakeholders every day. I don't get that on this project. I don't They just can't do that. So when I am meeting with them, I'm very organized, make sure that I can cover as much information as possible in that short period of time so that I can make it really efficient and valuable for everybody. So that's a few ways that you can handle the time constraint challenges. I think another real common one is conflicting expectations. One stakeholder once insists it has to be blue, and the other one says it has to be green. So you can, in some cases, you can work with the project sponsor or the product owner to establish a direction. In some cases, like the second mistake I made, each stakeholder had a different direction they wanted to take the software. Had I talked to the manager, he would have directed me in a specific direction. Um, so another thing you can do is provide the explanations of the direction to the stakeholder. If they know that their favorite thing isn't part of the scope of the project, they'll know that it's not worth putting it in the list of wants and needs for me. I would want to know that so that I know if they're going to be disappointed. But if they want it to be part of the project, they would need to talk to the sponsor to change the scope of the project. In an agile project, we embrace change. So bring it on if that's the case. Um, so, but anyway, one way to help those conflicts is make it clear what you understand that direction is, and then repeat it over and over. Make sure you that they're aware of it. Make an artifact. I know in one project all the stakeholders and everybody was in a very open project area, and we just posted big posters of the scope of the project, like the scope diagrams and lists of direction so that anybody walking through would be reminded where our direction is and what we're trying to accomplish. Another challenge that you might come across is a lack of engagement. People just don't care. Well, it's important to find out what the concerns are and address them. If they're a blocker, that's critical. Just make sure they're looped in. If they're a champion, you should be able to address the problem, but you need to find out what it is. And then remind everybody what they're going to gain from the project. If all this is starting to be overwhelming or too hard or too complicated, reminding them frequently what they gain from the project keeps them focused on the end goal. And then another problem is too many stakeholders. If you just have people all over the place, and there's just like that last 3-day workshop, that you can really run into problems with a lot of stakeholders. You have to realize you can't please everyone. You have to focus on the key champions. You have to make sure that you have good communication, streamline the information to the other stakeholders so you're not overwhelmed with a communication nightmare. But in the process, focusing on the key champions, you can overcome that challenge and deliver a project successfully. That's what I have for you today. That's stakeholders. Stakeholders are your critical success factor. Manage them well, and you'll be able to be that link of communication between the solution and the people.
Thank you so much, Mike.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Wow. Thank you so much. I would say for the first time, you have really simplified the concept, stakeholder management. You have really simplified it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
that. Yes. Ebenezer, do you want to say anything? You can have
Well,
the
I'd
floor.
like to say a very big thank you, Mike. It's an honor having you jumping in. I know it's been a lot of tight schedule for you, and I'm excited that you're able to kind of join in. You know, the topic kind of looks like it's a little, simple, but the truth of the matter is when you get into complex projects, honestly, you would appreciate the depth of what Mike is sharing. Because I've been on those kind of projects, and of
Yeah.
course, some of them need to play lots of politics, if you know what I mean. So yeah, we appreciate this a lot, and I think I especially also love the value stream analysis,
Yeah.
which is very, very, very important as well. So I guess we can maybe open it up for a few questions if people have questions tonight.
Yeah, for I think mine would be a comment. So thank you again, Mike. There was a part of your presentation where you talked about decision making. Now I have a better understanding. I'm on a project and I see that they're spending so much time on operating model. Now I see why they are doing that, because once everybody agrees on what is expected on the future state of the solution, and then there's a consensus, then nobody can come back and say, oh, I didn't know this was it. So it's like a guide, operational decision making, I'll say, that you have to think about the future right now, so that
Yeah.
there don't be a lot of back and forth on that stage. So thank you for that. Now I know why we're spending so much time on operating model. now
Yeah.
now I understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Mary Gloria has a question. Mary.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question for you, Mike. Thank you so
Sure.
much for dissecting stakeholder analysis. Thank you. My question is, you talked about time constraints as one of the challenges. I totally agree. And I want to ask you, I mean, from your wealth of experience, do you really like, is it possible you can share with us a particular recommendation on how in getting organized and, being very efficient? Because sometimes these people, they have very short time to spend with
Mhm.
you. Is there any secret you can give us? Because I know you're successful in the career, so we'll be, oh, yes, I will appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. The first thing is be really conscious of dead space in a meeting, and figure out a way to remove it. So, for example, um, so I mentioned I'm on a project right now. I've been on this project quite a while. We've fine-tuned a lot of the practices, but when I first started, they would ask questions, and then I would struggle to get the right JIRA thing up, and we'd lose 10 seconds there. And then they would ask a question, and I would realize, oh shoot, that was in the list, but I never looked at it before the meeting, and now I don't know what the answer is. So I would pull it up and I'd have to read it a bit, and I would waste another 10 seconds there. And there would be these little delays that I'd make a note of it, and I'd say, I gotta do that better next time. So now what I'm doing in this particular project is I go through my notes on the last two meetings, and I look for things that they mentioned. And then I try to review that in case they mention it again. So now I don't have to look that one up. The other thing I do is I make it really, I spend some time making sure that I have the list of things I need to accomplish really clear in my mind. I've reviewed them. I've looked at the details. I don't have to go look it up in the meeting. I have the answers. If they ask a question, I have my questions that I can ask them, so I'm not missing anything. And so it's really being conscious of the things that seem to not run as smoothly as possible each time you look at it. Really what it comes down to is I spend a lot of time, not a lot of time. Yeah, a lot of time. I spend a lot of time before the meeting, just being prepared so that it really runs smoothly.
Thank you so much.
In other projects where time constraint wasn't a problem, and I had ready access to stakeholders, I didn't spend much time not talking to stakeholders. I just talked to them all the time because they were available. So I quickly made sure that I would just get the answer. So it really depends on the type of project, the type of interaction and relationship you have.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. Thank
I
you.
have, I have two questions.
Sure.
I've already thrown one into the chat, but I'll just ask the second one so that we don't take much of our time. So my second question is, well, what happens where you cannot speak to all the stakeholders? You did mention the fact that you can speak to all the stakeholders at the beginning of the project and all of that, and you had an incident whereby the manager didn't even know much of what was going on with the team. Sometimes with bureaucracy and politics and all the bottlenecks involved, one might not really be able to speak to all the stakeholders that is involved and get their opinion or get their the issues that they may face. How do you manage such such situations.
So are you saying that some of the stakeholders just aren't willing to talk to you, or that
No,
you're not able to, you're not given the
yeah,
permission to talk to them?
yeah, you're not given the permission to speak to them. You have to speak to their managers, which was the typical thing
Okay.
that happened
Yeah.
in your own case. You can't just speak to everybody. You have to speak to representatives, people
Yeah.
who like their managers. Whereas people who actually do the work, they may have different issues. They may have issues that the managers might not be aware of.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think experience helps because you can give the person who has made the decision that somebody that you don't need to talk to them. You can explain your personal experiences, but you can also borrow my experiences and say this is the kind of thing that happens when we're not able to talk to all the stakeholders. Sometimes you can't get around that. That like it's just there's projects don't run smooth all the time. So sometimes you have a challenge that you have to deal with, but you can try and mitigate it by explaining how important it is to talk to all the stakeholders. You might have to get creative. You might have to figure out a way so that you don't end up talking to those stakeholders too much. Like for example, the current project I'm on, I've been on it for 4 years, one project. I've been on it for 4 years, and initially we were not allowed to talk to the customer of my customer. They're the ones that need this software, but we weren't allowed to talk to them. Now we get a regular meeting with them every week. It's the relationships is still managed by our customer, so we have to be really careful. But it's taken a long time, and the importance of it started to ring through. So eventually we were able to get contact with them regularly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. And my other question, which I have thrown in the chat, but I want to just explain it now, so you might not need to read it out from the chat.
Okay.
What happens if you have a stakeholder that can fit into more than one quadrant? You know, you have 4 quadrants there: influencers and interests. Sometimes some stakeholders may not fit into one. Do you put them in multiple places? An example would be one project I worked on some time ago. In that particular project, we felt the media, their interest was low. That was the thinking, that their interest was low. So we put them in a quadrant that will not really, well, we just, inform them. But then they blew it out of proportion, and their interest became very, very high. If we had known from the onset that their interest was high, we would have, analyzed them properly. What happens? Can you put a stakeholder in more than one box in that quadrant?
Typically not, but it's really just a guide. So a stakeholder's interest and influence can change over the course of the project. And so they do have a level of interest. Maybe it's very high, maybe it's very low, but it's not both. But it might be unknown. You might not know what their interest is, but you might know that they have a great deal of impact in the outcome. So then I might put them across the entire top. So to remind me, I don't know where they land here, but they're somewhere in here. But if that was true, then I would quickly try to figure out if it's right. In your case, you thought you had it nailed. You didn't think it was both. You thought there was low. It turned out to be high. So that's where you want to review with your stakeholders. Review and make sure not only the details of what you're doing, but the details of what they're doing, the details of what they care about. Because sometimes you get a stakeholder that doesn't that wishes you would go away. They don't want to change anything. So they're kind of a blocker. They're a subject matter expert there, but they're a blocker. They would love to see this fail. They don't want to change anything about the way they do this. They're not interested. But over time, they realize this is going through. This is really going to happen. I better get on board because they're gonna mess this up and deliver something I can't use. And suddenly now they're engaged. And so it's important to review that where the person lies over time to be sure you're still right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then you change your communication strategy once you find out the change.
Okay.
That's amazing. I think we have just one question as well in the chat. I'll just take that up real quick. So the question says, talking about personas or stakeholders, do you mean we need to know the age, general interests, etc. of stakeholders in the project? Yeah, I'll leave that to Mike.
Well,
I was almost answering it.
oh yeah. It depends. It always depends, right? No, not generally not. But the personas, you saw the personas had age and interests and all that sort of thing. That was to make them feel more real. For a typical stakeholder, you need to find out the things that matter for your project. But let's say, for example, let's say you're delivering some sort of healthcare solution, and you understand that some of the consumers of that healthcare solution are old, and some of them are new parents. Well, you can predict some of the things that they want because you know their age. So in that case, it would be helpful to know maybe not their specific age, but where they are in life. I think generally that kind of information is probably a privacy problem, so you wouldn't deserve to know it. But you want to find out everything. You want to capture everything that you want. You want to capture the things you need to be successful, and you'll need to put some thought into what that might be. It might be their stage in life that might be unaffected. Like for my project, it doesn't matter that one of the VPs of the company is close to retirement. It will if he's days from retirement. Maybe he's not a stakeholder I can rely on. So now suddenly I care. But yeah, so it's really just depends on, you want to find out the things that matter. In that case, you'd want to find out are these stakeholders all planning to be available for the extent of the project? You don't need to know their age for that, but someone might not be.
Yeah.
And
So
someone
like
might.
you said, yeah. And like you said, I mean, it's essentially about their impact and influence. And I
Yeah,
think that's what matters, right? If you don't know
yeah,
who's who, then you wouldn't know, how to communicate or how to manage or collaborate with those stakeholders, right?
right.
So I
And
think that's
part of impact and influence and impact is, what are they impacting? What part of this solution are they impacting? Where is their influence? And that could be a different set of demographics for one stakeholder than it is for another.
absolutely, absolutely spot on, spot on. So I think we have one more question right here before we kind of wrap this up real quick. Um, So talking about stakeholder mapping, the question is, do you think mapping out stakeholder analysis is compulsory in every project, or you leave it to the project manager to kind of communicate that?
Not the second, not the latter. I wouldn't leave it up to the project manager to tell you what you need to do, but I don't think it's needed in every project. Every project has different. The project itself has a personality, so you have to figure out what that project requires. There are. I'm a contractor. I'm not an employee. I'm a contractor. So I end up on projects pretty frequently. When I get to a project, I want a deliverable that I can produce by the end of my first week. I don't feel right just drinking in information and not producing something. So what I tend to do is create a scope document, a scope diagram. It doesn't even have to be very specific. Some artifact by the end of the week that describes my understanding of the scope of the project. Then it gives me a reason to go talk to the stakeholders and say, is this your understanding of the project? And the stakeholders includes the sponsor and the project manager. Is this your understanding of the scope of the project? Am I capturing it right? And I'm saying that because I don't always make a scope diagram. I like to do that. Most projects don't require it because the scope is, no, that's not true. I was going to say most of the time the scope is clear. That's not always true. So to clarify the scope, diagram is great. But it really depends on the project. Like for example, I worked on a pipeline project. And in that project, we really needed to think about and address and mitigate all the risks. I don't always make a risk registry. We don't have one in the project I'm in now, but boy, that pipeline project relied desperately on that risk register. So it matters. It depends on what your project needs, what the personality of your project is.
Amazing. I think that's all the questions we have now. And
Okay.
honestly, this has been very insightful, I must say. Thank you once again, Mike. Honestly, we really enjoyed your session. And I'm glad I'm speaking the mind of everyone. It's really, really insightful. And honestly, like I said before, you would appreciate this a little more when you've been on large, complex projects with different personalities, influences, different people all over the place, employees, contractors, vendors, lots of interesting personalities, then you would know and appreciate that. This is very insightful for sure. Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. Very
Yeah.
nice to meet all of you.
Yeah. Thank you,
Awesome.
Mike. Yeah, I can say that we are going to come back to ask you to come back to our chapter. We really enjoy this.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So we are going to come back, and maybe next year we'll discuss that with you. We really enjoy the conversation. What you mentioned earlier when you said you create a scope diagram, I'm going to pick that. That's going to be my takeaway, because what you have done is to keep the conversation going. So there's a reason to meet with them, and so yeah. So I'm gonna be that'll be my biggest takeaway from this meeting. How to keep the conversation going. Yeah, that's a reason to talk to them, because they need to clarify what your own understanding of the project. So thank you. And on behalf of the chapter, New Brunswick chapter, we want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience, your expertise, and of course your perspectives. You have shared different scenarios with us, and that's helped with our understanding of the concept of stakeholder management. And it resonates with us because some of us are working on projects, have worked on projects in the past. And thank you, like I mentioned earlier, you help simplify this concept. And like Ebenezer mentioned, it's simple, but it's delicate, and it is critical to the success of a project. So we thank you. Thank you for inspiring us. And we're saying that going forward, we're going to prioritize our stakeholders and recognize their role in driving successful outcomes. So we want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. Yes.
Thank you.
Much, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, I don't know if we can turn on our cameras just so we can take a real quick group picture, please. Everybody. Are we all set?
Do you want to remove the pin so that you can have a lot of people
Oh yeah, that's already
to
removed.
capture a lot of people?
Yeah. Okay. Let's try one more time. I think we have more people now.
Yeah.
I'll try again real quick. So we all set now. Sec. More people are still turning on their cameras. More people still turning on their cameras.
Are we supposed to smile?
Please smile.
Thank you so much. That's been amazing for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.